Hi, I'm Dr. Survam Patel. I'm the managing partner of Compliant Clients. I created Compliant Clients after listening to personal injury firms telling me they all had problems with getting their plaintiffs to make doctor's appointments. They just didn't have the manpower or time to prevent these gaps in treatment all the time. I see it all the time myself. So I thought to myself, hey, that's probably an area I might be able to help out with. So today we're going to be talking about the importance of managing time. Joining me right now is one of the leading attorneys in the US, John Romano, and he's here to help new and seasoned attorneys more effectively manage their time for better results. John, could you please tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey?
I am coming up on May 10th of this year. I will have been practicing 50 years. I can honestly say I could pass a lie detector test, put my hand on a Bible and swear to tell the truth right now. Practicing all these years, when I got up this morning, like every morning, no matter how excited and fired up I was as a young lawyer when I was sworn in, 11 o'clock a.m., May 10th, 1974, I am more thrilled about being a lawyer now. I will never, ever, ever retire. I hope I can just keep on going and going and going. They would have to drag me away. I love being a lawyer and I love what we do as lawyers. So there you have it. There's a little bit about the journey, and it's a journey that I've taken that's been wonderful because of my parents and my brothers, my sisters, my mom, our kids, and so many of the mentors and the wonderful people in my life who have always done so much to help me in every way possible. And that's the way that I've been able to do it, is with the help and support of everybody else.
Oh, that's a great introduction. I didn't know what to expect. That couldn't have been any more comprehensive of your upbringing and what your success has translated to today. I didn't know if you knew this, John, but I actually saw you many years ago when I was attending one of my first trial conferences. I forget where it might have been NTL, might have been another conference, but you were speaking, and I was so I was honestly enraptured in the experience that you had when you're up on stage and the passion you had when you were teaching other trial attorneys about just various best practices. I read up a little bit about you, by the way, just for anyone else watching this podcast. I'm going to have to put you on the spot, John. John, just a little bit about him. He lectures, or he's been lecturing across America on trial advocacy and tort and criminal law. He's authored 3 textbooks. He's offered thousands of legal opinions, and he's published more than 100 articles during his tenure as, of course, now he's let us know, a distinguished trial attorney for 50 years. And in 2016, you were recently inducted to the Trial Lawyer Hall of Fame. That is an amazing credential, and congratulations to everything that you've done for the benefit of, U.S. citizens.
Well, look, it's been a joy, though, and I can honestly say almost all of it we've been able to do with a smile and with a great deal of happiness. That doesn't mean there aren't some rough days along the way, or sometimes of stress or pressure, but I've told people this many times: pressure is a gift from God. It is good to be under pressure. If you don't like stress and pressure, don't become a trauma surgeon. If you don't like stress and pressure, don't want to be a quarterback in the NFL.
Right. No.
And so I tell people that's what we are supposed to do. And the teaching, I've always loved that. I've always thought if I were not doing what I'm doing now as a trial lawyer, I would want to be a coach and a teacher.
Great. So, like, with everything you have going on for you personally and for your law firm, how important is it to manage time, and what is your approach? What's been working for you all these years?
Well, that's a great question, because there are many who would say Romano has no earthly idea of how to manage time. Managing time, it's a matter of this. The first thing is the concept of just own it. if you have something that needs to get done, own it. Be a part of making it happen, of completing the task. It's okay to delegate when it is necessary, but that doesn't mean you abandon the task. You're having someone else help you or assist you, or you assign it to that person, but you are still a part of it. And that's what's so important. A big mistake people have is when they say, well, I'm going to delegate that, and they just shut it out like they are not to have any more responsibility with that task. And that to me can be a mistake when you're trying to manage your time. Another part of this, and you'll hear a lot of people in initial interviews when they come in for a job, like with our firm, I will get this all the time. Talk to me, Mr. Romano, about the work-life balance. And I will say to them, forget work-life balance. You can't say, well, if I work this many hours a day, then I need this many hours with my family, or this many hours with my buddies on a golf course, or people jumping off on hunting trips. It's not about that. It's about fulfillment. It's about work-life fulfillment. Somebody like me, when I'm working, I'm one of those people who can tell you I've never worked a day in my life. I actually, you might get a kick out of this.
Yep.
I loved Marine Corps boot camp. That does not mean that I loved every moment. I didn't.
Okay. I would imagine not. Yeah.
It was great. It was like going back to high school football and sports. It was a challenge. It was there was some comic relief in watching the drill instructors and the way they would behave towards us, and they were wonderful people, and they were disciplined. They were serious. They were trying to teach us important things, but some of it was really funny. And it's all a matter of how you approach it. So when you're trying to manage time, you can't sit back and put these time parameters on it. It's like a mother who has a child saying that it can't happen that my infant child is going to wake up 4 times tonight. I'm going to do something to make it where it's 3 times, and then tomorrow night it's 2 times. That's not going to happen. So you approach it, what can I do to make this fulfilling in our lives? And that's what young moms who are happy do. They look at it as how wonderful and fulfilling it is. And it's the same thing in what we do, what I do, what you do. It's trying to manage things and make sure you're getting everything done, and you're doing it in a way where it is fulfilling for everybody. In my case, it would be helping the clients. It would be doing everything that we want to be doing with our family. It would be handling the cases, taking the depositions. But I think people make a mistake when they sit back and try to say, well, if I work 8 hours, 5 days a week, then the only way I can be happy is I must work, I must play or be with family and friends X amount of hours. That's not the way it works. And when people try to do it that way, then they start getting upset. They're upset. You know, I was not able to leave work until 7 o'clock at night. If this keeps up, I'm going to quit my job. That's ridiculous. That's just ridiculous. That's not the right approach.
Yeah. I love how you had the reference of, you know, mothers and, you know, when they have a new baby, because I'm actually in that boat right now. That was a refreshing reframe. I have a 10-month-old and a 3-year-old. So my mornings start earlier. You don't have to laugh that much, John, but you know, my mornings start a little bit.
No.
They don't have to, they start a little bit earlier than I'd like. But from what I hear you saying, in other words, you are focused on managing time and not the other way around. So like, tell us a little bit about connectionology, and what advice would you have to give to new attorneys just starting out, and maybe some things you've learned along the way as well.
Well, formally it's called Connectionology Seminars of America. It's a private seminar company we started several years ago to connect all of the people who we know, who are our friends, our lawyers who we know, experts who we know, saying, what can we do to help you connect with lawyers all over the country? And we decided we're going to do that. We're going to have seminars, and we had seminars up until March of 2020 when COVID hit.
Mm-hmm.
And although we continued with the seminars, we moved right into webinars. And since then, we've now done close to 400 webinars. And we will have a webinar where, let's say a lawyer I know from West Virginia is a wonderful trucking lawyer. Well, he or she will say, I want to do a webinar with an accident reconstruction expert who specializes in trucking accident reconstruction. Great. So we give them the floor, the platform. They do the webinar. We have people who sponsor the webinar. And what happens is the attendees are learning. The trucking expert, the trucking lawyer are teaching. They are bonding with the attendees. So they're all building relationships with one another. And the next thing you know, they, along with the sponsors, are doing business with one another. And here's the great benefit to all of it. An amazing high percentage of them become friends, and they become friends for life. And it's an extraordinary thing to see how coming together through these seminars and organizations builds on these friendships. It's one of the great bennies of what we do.
I think that's an amazing, I mean, it's so much, it must be so amazing for you to see your brainchild come, get off the ground and blossom into what it is right now. The fact that you've had 400 webinars, the fact that you're around the country, and the fact that your company, Connectionology Seminars of America, has been growing year over year is a testament to how much it's needed in the space, how much these connections really matter in the space of trial law.
Yeah, and Connectionology, it was moving along gradually, and then we were blessed to come upon, and you know her, Ginger Jarrett, and she became our executive director and seminar director, and she is a true visionary, and she has put it all together, and it has turned into something really magic for all of us. And so my wife Nancy and I, we work with Ginger on the phone today, virtually every day, and all the folks in our law firm work with Connectionology, and our lawyers and friends all around the country. And it's really turned out to be a wonderful, wonderful way of giving that platform to everybody.
Oh, that's great. So, John, I had a question for you. What is, and this is a question I get asked often by seasoned attorneys as well as new attorneys when they are first introduced to the concept of transportation on lien as it relates to managing time. I'd love to get your honest feedback on how you think turning or preventing gaps in treatment by using transportation on lien services when appropriate. What does that do for time management and the work life fulfillment, not the balance, but the work life fulfillment of very busy, seasoned and new trial attorneys? What does that mean to you?
Well, let me just back up and say this. Only as recently as this past weekend, I've been working on a checklist on items to consider for a plaintiff lawyer on whether to accept or decline a personal injury or wrongful death case. Mm-hmm. One of the areas that is a powerful and explosive area is delay in treatment right after the incident occurs, or gaps in treatment. When a jury hears the defense lawyer say, and obviously we try to say it first, but the defense lawyer will want to say it over and over again, The collision happened on February 1st. The plaintiff did not see a doctor until a month later. Saw the doctor a couple of 3 times. And then what happened? Plaintiff didn't go back to see a doctor for 4 more months. And then it was one gap after another after another. What happens in these instances is the plaintiff's case loses credibility. So anything we can do to help the client and help our law firm in helping the client by getting the client to these appointments, to treatment, to the doctors, to the neuropsychologist, to the therapist, to whomever they need to see in terms of medical care and treatment to eliminate or minimize any gaps, it is going to make that case better. It is going to help the client. It's going to help everybody, the judge, the jury, because no matter what happens, they're all looking at that. So when somebody comes along, I can't imagine who that might be, but somebody comes along and has a novel idea of how to provide the transportation to get people to the therapists and the doctors and the emergency room and the drugstore and all the places they need to get, that is monumentally wonderful. And it helps everybody. It's a win, 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 win.
Well, of course, I like to say that one of the other areas, once we're able to educate law firms on the value of course, preventing gaps in treatment, another hurdle that we seem to need to overcome is educating attorneys on the consideration of transportation not being a case expense when you use a medical provider like Compliant Clients, but it's actually a recoverable and compensable medical bill backed by various legal memorandums based on personal injury law, where it says as long as the transportation is related to the injury, it should be recoverable and compensable in a personal injury judgment. So what would you say to other seasoned and new attorneys that are concerned that, hey, even if I do, right now when I'm doing transportation, it's a case expense. I'm not making anything off of it. It's not adding value to my case. Why would I outsource it outside of course, eliminating the burden and the administrative burden and hassle of scheduling rides, when in actuality, you get to outsource this and it turns into a medical bill? What would you say to an attorney?
Well, first and foremost, I would say to that attorney, set everything else aside and remember that in every case, you have 3 agendas. Number 1 is the agenda of your client. Number 2 is the agenda of your client. Number 3 is the agenda of the client. You look out for the client interests. And I will say to that lawyer, don't be talking to me about fees. Don't be talking to me about costs. Don't be talking to me about time and all that. Talk to me about what is best for your client. Because if you do, as a lawyer, what is best for your client, it will always work out in the end, short run and long run, better for you and your law firm, the system of justice, and society. That is so important to understand that concept of doing what needs to be done for the client. So if you circle back then and say, all right, we know it's best for the client because the client can't otherwise get to all of these places. Then I want to say to that lawyer, understand that if you communicate timely and effectively with the medical personnel in the case, that kind of transportation is something that can be ordered, it can be arranged, it can be in essence where a doctor is ordering that the transportation is necessary under these circumstances. And I could go through a whole host of items to where we find it is not only a necessary component, but you can't do without it as part of the care and treatment. So it does become a part of what are the basic medical expenses in the case.
Absolutely. And I do appreciate the insight on that. So getting a little deeper into what's been going around or going on in state specific tort reform. 2024, 2023, I guess recently has seen a lot of tort reform that's just made it a lot more difficult for trial attorneys to practice and represent their injured plaintiffs fairly. And as we've already stated before, firms are busy, time is gold. Like, what do you think? Are there any like sleeper ideas out there that are hiding in plain sight that you think many new or seasoned attorneys are overlooking?
Well, here's what happens. First of all, we call it tort deform. And the first time that I learned about it was in 1972, when the insurance industry made a run on trying to reform our tort system in Florida. The key to minimizing or eliminating tort reform is this. Once a person is properly educated on the law and what different laws mean and what their consequences mean, and once that person believes that, then that person, when it comes to a tort reform matter, would never vote in favor of or be in favor of tort reform. It is those who are either not properly educated on it or those who have other political agendas who want tort reform. You have many politicians in this country, an entire segment, who deep down disfavor and oppose the right to trial by a jury. Yet, when those individuals find themselves in a predicament where there's a big dispute, they're on their knees begging for a jury trial. So what we have to do is be vigilant to all tort reform or tort deform matters at all times and do everything we can to properly educate those who have the power to change the law. But we've got to also persuade them so that they believe it and they understand it and they comprehend it. Let me give you an example. It has been over 30 years since I was president of our Academy of Florida Trial Lawyers in Florida, now called the Florida Justice Association. There was a politician who was in office, and he wanted tort reform. And he constantly would preach on the floor when speaking of how basically, and now these are my words paraphrasing what he said, but he said, I don't believe in pain and suffering. He didn't believe in it because it was not politically expedient for him to believe in it, but soon a tragedy in his own family occurred. And he believed then in what pain and suffering was all about. And he began to talk to other politicians saying, I was wrong. And he spoke about the reality, the significance, the impact on life of when pain and suffering hits your family. The sad thing is it took a tragedy in his own family to make him understand that. But we've all got to continue to try to teach and to educate those who are the would-be voters who change these laws in the House and Senate of state congressional bodies and the United States Congress and governors and presidents and all the rest. It makes a difference, and that's why we must fight and not stop fighting on these issues.
Thank you for sharing that. That honestly my takeaway was from that, the amount of responsibility and the amount of responsibilities that trial attorneys have. It's it's incomparable to most other professions. Most professions, you have a responsibility to yourself, to the company, and then of course, outside of work, you have a responsibility to your family. But when you step into the realm of trial law, it becomes so much bigger. When you take it seriously, it becomes so much bigger because you have the responsibilities just as any other career does. But then you also have a greater responsibility to what makes this nation so great, to protecting all of us, right? And to obviously
It's true, and
efforts to make sure those protections don't go unnoticed
it's
and
true,
default.
and it requires a major team effort. If you go back even a couple of years before that, before when I was president of our Florida trial lawyers, we had a campaign, an amendment that the Florida doctors had put on the ballot. There was a mega tort reform constitutional amendment they were trying to get passed. And I was so proud to see not only the lawyers and all of the allied groups like Mothers Against Drunk Drivers and so many more come in and fight that tort reform. But I'll tell you that on the night before the vote was November 8th of 1988. So on Monday night, November 7th, I hope I got my dates right here.
You have a great memory, all
I
things
think
considered.
I think that it was. My wife Nancy and I were in the garage with our four boys, Eric, Todd, Chad, Ryan, and one of my brothers and some of our friends were all there building signs. It was the last effort, the last night, so that on voting day in Palm Beach County, and we had this going on all over the state, but in Palm Beach County, we would have signs everywhere. Vote no on Amendment 10. So there I am with my wife and our kids, and we got hammers and nails, and we're putting the signs together, and then we put them in the Suburbans, and we took off and start planting them everywhere that we could. It requires that. It requires a full commitment. It requires your family to be involved, because that's what we're doing. What we're doing, it is an all-encompassing effort to represent these clients and to do it right. And it happens in other professions and jobs and occupations also, where you need everybody to be on board with what you're doing in order to make it happen.
Absolutely. And I wanted to take it a one level higher, right? Going back up to make it relatable to anyone watching this podcast. Let me start with a story. You have stories that go back in the day. My story starts at 5 a.m. today. My son, my 10-month-old son, Rook, was the beginning of my fulfilling morning, because I'm going to use the words I learned on this podcast. It was a fulfilling experience to have him with me at 5 a.m. and I took him to Starbucks. And at Starbucks, they ask a different question every day. I actually had no clue I was going to bring this up until you started talking about the word fulfillment. But one of the questions, and it has tally marks, like, hey, which side do you choose, right? Also, earlier this week during Super Bowl, they were like, hey, who's going to win, Taylor Swift or Beyonce? They didn't even mention the team names. And then today's question was, which would you prefer, to laugh and be happy today or to have peace and content? And they had, I would say, over 80 responses, like 80 check marks. And obviously it was at 5 a.m. So I'm assuming it was just from the previous day. And I didn't do the tallying because I was holding a 10-month-old, but I did a quick look, and my pharmacist math enabled me to say at least 75% of the check marks or the tallies were being on the side of being happy and laughing. And so my last question to you in this podcast, as we wrap up, it affects us all, right? Like, I always thought that attorneys and entrepreneurs and anyone who just wants to get successful in career, a lot of them would just be focused on the dollar amount, the outcome of the case, the, whatever your paycheck is. But more and more, am I realizing, especially post COVID, people are genuinely valuing happiness much more across the board, personal injury or not. So again, last question for you before we wrap up is in specific to this field of personal injury, whether you're a trial attorney, paralegal, pre-lit team case manager, any advice you have on finding finding the balance to have happiness in not just your work life, but your personal side as well, to get the fulfillment and happiness that everyone so desperately seems to want to, value a lot more than anything else?
Well, I would say this, and this is something that I do think about a lot. Happiness is in relationships. End of story. Happiness is in relationships. Now, that includes your relationships with other people, family, friends, colleagues, for me, judges, court reporters, witnesses, whomever.
Right.
It also includes the relationship you have with yourself. And I tell people this, and I say this often. Remember this: in life, make every important decision, meaning every life decision, make that decision with your heart. Your brain will follow along, but do in your heart what you feel is right. And you will always get a good night's sleep. You will, by that, you know what I mean. You won't be stressing out that you made the wrong decision. You will feel good about yourself and what you have done. And here's what happens. When you make decisions with your heart, it is true that sometimes you will make a mistake. It's okay, because you will not have made a decision for a wrong reason, for a selfish reason, for an evil reason. You will have made a wrong decision because you just made a mistake. For example, you may have believed in someone who turned out to let everyone down. Okay, but make those decisions with your heart. I feel very strong about that. You can't sit down and make important life decisions by just saying we're going to add up the numbers, and if the numbers don't, it's like when a young parents having a child, it's not a mathematical formula. You have a child when you say let's have a child. Okay, and maybe the numbers don't work out, and maybe both families are saying you're too young, or you're too old, or you're too this, or you're too that. No, if that's what the two of you decide, and in your heart you feel that's what you do it. Okay.
I think anyone who ends up watching this podcast is going to be as surprised as I'm sure you and I are on where this went. Right. A lot of times when people listen to legal, legal podcasts or webinars, it focuses mostly on, logical problems and solutions. But I'm so honored and glad that we got to take a step. We address some of the logical problems and solutions, but it's always nice to talk more on an empathetic human level about, problems and desires that we all want, right? We all want want a fulfilling life. We want a happy life. And part of it is there's lots of different parts of it. And I'm so glad that we got to address some of it today. So John, again, thank you again. I know you're really busy in the middle of some pretty big cases. This is from what I can tell. I really appreciate you taking the time to join the Lean Line podcast. And for everyone else, you can check out our podcast over at compliantclients.com. You can listen to us wherever you have podcasts. John, do you have any last minute words for the viewers?
Well, look, it's an honor to do this with you. And it's wonderful that you're doing this because you're trying to get the word out about such important concepts, important steps, the work that you do, the work that others can do with you. And in the end, it helps all of our clients. And that's the key. That's the key, because then it comes back to our family, our staff, the people we work with, the people we love.
Absolutely. And I love what you said before. Just do right by your client and the rest will follow. And I think
It will.
I think all trial attorneys, legal vendors like myself, that's what we got to keep in mind when we're talking with anybody. Just keep the injured client in the front. Keep them and their best interest at heart, and good will follow. Thanks again for your time, John. We'll talk soon.